Hi y'all, welcome back to another Four Ways Collaboration video. This month we're pleased to have Mike Holton from Cleveland, England as a special guest presenter. This month's project was my idea. It's a needle case, a toothpick holder, or a pillbox. The one thing it has in common is that the hollowing is all done by drilling. I'm making a TravelMate, which is an emergency sewing kit for fixing clothing repairs on the fly. I got this idea from the South Auckland Woodturners Guild out of New Zealand. And they have a number of project guides on their website, so I encourage you to check that out.
Here's an example. This is one I turned about 15 years ago out of cherry. It consists of two parts. It's got an outer cover, and then it's got an inner core that has some thread and stores a couple of needles. It's about 60 millimeters long, or approximately 2 3/8 inches, and somewhere around 15 millimeters across, or about 5/8 of an inch. This is a great project for using spindle scraps. I'm using a piece of persimmon, which is a very dense hardwood. It's the only true ebony in the United States. One blank I've got 3 inches long. The other blank is 3 1/4 or 75 millimeter versus 80 millimeter. 3/4 of an inch in diameter, or about 19 millimeters. The other items you're going to need for this project is a chuck with jaws small enough to hold this type of small project. It could possibly be a collet chuck. You can also need a couple of drill bits. You're going to need one that's 3/32 of an inch, or 2 1/2 millimeter, or 1 3/8 of an inch, or 10 millimeter. As a basic spindle project, you only need a couple of basic tools, a parting tool and a spindle gouge. I prefer to also use a skew and a spindle roughing gouge. Your mileage may vary. So I'm going to start this project by roughing this out between centers. I'm using a spring-loaded punch, and this blank is 3/4 of an inch. It's big enough. If you don't get exactly centered, it's still going to be round, so then I put it between centers. You may prefer to put it in a chuck, turn one end around, and then turn it around. For making tenons, I generally prefer the larger beating and parting tool, but you can get away with something smaller. 1/8 is a little fussier for beginning turners because you have to make a couple of passes and then square it up, true it up. Before I tighten it up, I'm going to bring up the live center and get it in that little registration mark. And that way it will be concentric, and then I tighten it up. Before I drill, I face off the front. Okay, got it faced off. I'm using a drill chuck with a 10 millimeter or 3/8 inch drill bit. I'm going to drill a hole 40 millimeters, or I believe it's 1 9/16 of an inch deep. So I've marked it with a piece of tape, and I want to get that speed down just a little bit. No more than probably 600 or 700, 800.
You can get a lot of leverage on small pieces like this out near the end, small diameter with small chuck jaws, so I bring up tailstock support so I don't knock it out of kilter. So I use a skew to get it just as smooth a surface and round uniform cylinder, and I check the diameter periodically. I'm striving for a slightly oversized at 17 millimeter. I'll get it down to the final size a little bit later. But I want as smooth a surface as possible to make it easier to sand, reduce the amount of dust I'm going to have to deal with.
After I do it with the lathe on, I move with the grain. Now I decided to decorate the end of this. I'm using a 12 TPI thread chaser. I'm just not moving it laterally. So I'm making a series of small beads. Now I check the diameter because I've got to make sure that the inside doesn't become bigger than the outside. So I mark that. That's where I'm going to be parting it off. And I use a skew, just V-cuts. You know, some people are uncomfortable with skew, just you got to keep practicing. But a V-cut is the easiest thing you can do with a skew, and it does it better, makes this cut better than just about anything else. And then I catch it. Sometimes I do. Sometimes it hits the floor. I slow it down to about 1,000 RPM when I'm parting it off. And there it is. Now I'm putting the core in. I put it in square. You know, last time I turned it around between centers and used collet chuck. I'm showing you the other way to do it. If you've got fairly square pieces of wood, you can get a pretty good hold. So I round one end. I use spindle roughing gouge, just getting it roughly round. Then I'm going to stop and turn it around. Again, back to the skew, just to get as smooth a surface as I can. Although I'm going to keep cutting on this one so it doesn't make as much difference, but it's a good tool to get it round. Now I reverse it to finish rounding it off. I'm using an old Nova Precision MIDI chuck with timing bars. It works, but I'm lucky if I can use it without dropping the timing bars more than once. So I mark the center. I should have done this before I actually started turning this, but so I bring up the live center to center it in the chuck. And then I go back to spindle roughing gouge, because spindle roughing gouge removes wood really fast. So it's a handy tool. Here's what the finished size is going to look like with the dimensions. So now I've got to drill a hole. I'm going to drill a 3/32 inch hole, or about 2.5 millimeter if you're using metric. I don't have metric drills, so it's 3/32. And I put it in the chuck with it off the lathe, because it's easier for me to verify that I've got the drill bit actually centered in the chuck. Sometimes if you don't, you can wallow a big hole before you recognize your mistake. And then I gradually drill that hole. And you can see I'm going fast, and it's smoking. Not enough to set off the fire alarm, fortunately. You do have a fire extinguisher in your shop, don't you? And I brush out the dried, burned up shavings. And take it out, and whew, it's hot, hot, hot. The original plans call for drilling a hole 55 millimeter deep, but I can't drill that deep with this short drill bit. I can only drill 46 millimeters, but as it turns out, that's still longer than the needle, so it'll be okay. I decided to opt for a larger drill bit, 7/32, so I can go a little bit deeper. So I'll re-drill the hole. Sometimes you just got to work out the details as you go along. And I measure how deep I'm going to go, and this will give me that full drill dimension of about 55 millimeters. Always hold on to your drill chuck, so when you're pulling it out, if it's getting stuck, you'll know it, and you can shut off the lathe. Big safety concern. So now I finish rounding off the outside. I didn't bring up the tailstock here, probably should have. But I'm getting it round. and smooth. Now I bring up the outside to measure just how far down that shoulder is going to be, and I mark that. This is what the dimensions of that core are going to look like. You can see I've got a drop down area that's a little bit smaller to hold the thread, and then lips to kind of keep it in place. Dimensions are approximate. Fit's more important than the exact size. So I mark that shoulder and then start coming in. And with a live center, it would be tough to get it down on that end. But use light pressure, high speed. I'm probably going 2,000 RPM. And check the outside dimension. And I missed some footage here, but that's where we got to. The inside's got to slip in there comfortably, and it's got to be recessed enough to hold the thread and not interfere with the fit. So that inner part's got to be smaller than the shoulder, and it takes several tries to get that shoulder right. And I use a parting tool to keep a nice square shoulder, and use it almost like a little skew to clean it up a little bit, make it a little bit smaller. I just got to make sure I don't get it too small, or I get into that hole. Like box making, you just got to take your time, do plenty of trial fits, use your calipers. So I'm measuring a 1/2 inch, which is that hole we drilled, or about 10, I'd say 1/2 inch, 3/8 of an inch. So I measure the drill bit with calipers, and then I can use that to size this shoulder. This is an uncomfortable process for me, but it's a fast way to size it. I have some benign tremors in my left hand, make it a little harder to control that calipers. Okay. And come in there with that skew to clean that up. Take a very fine plane cut, just dust now toward the very end. Get that nice snug fit. And I'm coming in there with a 1/8 inch DIY parting tool to do that final sizing. Get that corner cleaned up. And take that thread area down just a little bit more. And I've got that final fit, except for a little bit cleaning up into that shoulder. It turns out it's bumping a little bit against the edge. I didn't measure it precisely, so I've got to come back with a skew and just do some slightest refinement on the end so it'll fit within where that drill bit kind of cones in to the bottom. And it just doesn't take but just a tiny little bit to get it to fit. Careful measurement on these projects. And now we've got a nice clean snug fit. And a little bit of sanding with 400 grit. Actually, I think I'm starting with 240. So I mount it, and I'm using, like typical box making, I'm using the base, if you will, as a jam chuck. And I decide I'm going to decorate the outside, so I'm using a knurling tool. This is Ron Brown's Best. 12 TPI, kind of coarse. And you got to go real slow with this. You got to take your time, hold it in place, because it's not cutting. It's beating that grain down to knurl it. So take your time. If you don't get good results, it's just going too fast. Speed's about 350 for this, and I get a nice little detail at the bottom. But when you do texturing like this, you need to frame it. So I'm reach for my homemade point tool and just put a tiny little beaded frame around it to accent it. And I put a little bit of abrasive paste on it so you can see it a little bit better. So now I'm taking the inside down a little bit. I'm deciding to make a little bead right there at the joint, so I've got to keep that other piece on there to get the size about right. And then I'll remove the outside and finish turning that bead using a 3/8 inch spindle gouge. Then I'm going to come in from the other direction into that bead. I want that bead to be proud, and I want a very subtle slope. So I'm going to mark the inside, the outer limit while I've got this tool in my hand. Now I start that slope down, just a very gradual slope. Make it a little easier to grab with your fingers. And add just a little bit of a detail with the shape. Curves are almost always more pleasing than straights. And yep, it's getting close. Take that bead down just a little bit more. Just behind that bead. I'm making essentially a cove, so I'm using the cutting technique that you'd use for a cove. And you get it actually asymmetrical cove. It's like a one-sided cove. And then I sand it again starting with 240 because I've got nice clean cuts and no real tool marks. And then I come back with 400 grit just to get it nice and smooth. This is cloth back sandpaper. You just turn it round so you don't get rid of any crisp corners. And that gets in that cove real well by just folding it. Now I start the parting off by just removing some waste wood with a 1/8 inch parting tool. And then I come back with a skew to make that final cut. It's almost like a very flat cone. And then I sand it before I take it down too far. This persimmon is pretty wood with its black flecks. Only true ivory we have in North America. And then I try to catch it. Slowly, one-handed skew, parting it off. Gotta leave plenty of room in there for it to part off. And I was able to catch it. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And there's the final look with a nice snug fit. So I decided I'm going to put a little detail on the end. So how do I do that? Well, I make a little jam chuck by drilling a hole with that same size bit that I hollowed with, and by golly, that inner core just fits snugly down in there. And that makes it easy for me to come back in there with that knurling tool. And it's a little bit off center, but that's okay. Close enough for knurling. Although this, I'll find it gives me a slightly different pattern because it slipped on me a little bit. And when it slips on you, it tends to give you a swirl. Again, got to take your time, hold it 350 RPM. And there we go. Not a bad pattern. Not quite like the other one. And again, you got to frame it. Bring up that 6mm 1/4 inch point tool. Handy little tool for box making. These little pieces of steel don't cost much. You could probably use regular carbon steel, a drill rod or something, but high-speed steel pieces are not real expensive. So I come in there with abrasive paste, beeswax, diatomaceous earth, mineral oil, and just give it a nice shine. Put a little oil wax on there. Cut off 2 to 3 millimeters of 2-3 meters of each color. Black and white is good, and then just twist it on. I'll leave it to your imagination how to best wind this. This project is small, but it teaches some important skills. Accurate drilling depth, sometimes a lesson I have to relearn. Controlling diameters, creating a good friction fit. Those are skills that transfer directly into more advanced projects like boxes and threaded work.
That's my take on this month's Four Ways Collaboration project, and I'm genuinely curious to see how Richard, Tommy, and our guest presenter Mike Holton handle their project. When you get 4 different turners with 4 different techniques, 4 different woods, 4 different design opportunities, I guarantee you you're going to get different results, and that's what makes this collaboration series so much fun. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up to help push it out to other like-minded woodturners. Appreciate your comments. Leave them in the comments below. If you're a new visitor, tell me the one thing that you especially you got out of this video. And remember, y'all stay safe and come on back, you hear?